GMing is a lot of damn work. Making encounters, setting up maps, finding players, creating a consistent schedule, managing player expectations, including and using your own material that you want for your particular system, learning the rules and making judgment calls on them, and balancing all of that with your busy life full of all the relationships and responsibilities you may or may not have. So, when I was thinking about me as a GM and, well, the GMing experience, I thought one specific question. How the heck do I save time as a game master? And better yet, what are some ways to make some tasks as game masters less time intensive? So, today we're going to be talking about that very question. Just how the heck should we save time as game masters? And first, let's discuss why GMing is so time consuming. So, I have a bit of a confession to make about the question asked earlier. It's a trick question because there's no right or wrong. GMing isn't inherently time intensive, nor is it not. GMing is something you do because it's fun, duh, and it can be as time intensive as you would like. And it also depends on, say, the system and your GM style. For instance, if you love world building and you love creating graphic detail every single session and writing out several notes for your sessions and campaign, then GMing will be far more time consuming if, say, you're running a D&D 5e game where it requires a lot of lore and a lot of back thought and a lot of backstory. Whereas if you're running, say, a one-shot, a module, or even a GM-less system, then it makes sense that the GMing process is not going to be nearly as time consuming or emotionally intensive. So there's no right or wrong answer to whether or not GMing is time intensive and emotionally intensive. It largely depends on you. So rather, the question we really should be asking and answering is, how do you more effectively GM with the amount of time you have? And I think that first starts off with looking introspectively. First, to look introspectively, I'm going to ask you one specific question. What do you love to do as a game master when you're running your game? Let me know down below in the comment section. Is it world building? Is it creating tokens? Is it creating maps? What is it? Once you know what you enjoy the most as a game master, focus on that. Here's an example. You're crafting this awesome steampunk set world. You pull from games like BioShock, Full Metal Alchemist, and the Wild Arms franchise. So you spend a lot of time on, say, creating interesting and nuanced NPCs and crafting an amazing city for your players to live in. And you spend hours and hours every day grinding that out for your players every single session. Mind you, this behavior is fine. As a GM, you should do that. You should be excited to create awesome worlds, tell awesome stories, and provide fun experiences with your players. And especially if you're having fun, go for it. Seriously, I mean that. Because no one GMs because they hate it, you GM because you like it. However, anything that is done to an extreme is bound to not be good for you. So balance is important and necessary. Because without balance, first off, burnout might happen because you're putting in so much time, energy for something that might not be seen in your game. Secondly, your players might not care about the same thing that you as a GM care about. And of course, that's something you need to have a conversation about on what do you want to see in your game, both as a GM and for the players. So balance helps you to avoid burnout and also communicate with your players about what do you want in your game, as well as telling them what you want to include in the game. Alright, so we understand that you've identified what you enjoy GMing. Next is to focus on the one priority for your game. So when I say streamline, quote unquote, and focus on your personal interests, what exactly does that look like? Here's how I would do it. First, write out one thing you want to cover in that game session or campaign. For instance, if you want to create interesting combat encounters, make that your focus. Also, let the players know that you want to focus on that specific aspect of the game. This will help the players see if this is the game that interests them or if they should look for another GM. It'll save you a lot of trouble, trust me. Secondly, streamline or quicken the logistics of everything else that isn't that one priority. So, Let's use the example before. As a game master, you love interesting and nuanced and narrative-driven combat encounters that also have a little bit of tactical edge. So, to create combat encounters in a virtual tabletop or even in person, you're going to need things like maps, an interesting encounter premise, tokens or miniatures, NPCs. These are all aspects that you need to address, so if you only focus on making interesting combat, you need to address these other parts. And to do that, just use pre-generated content, randomly generated content, or stuff that's found online so that you're not spending hours creating not only the one thing you've prioritized, but also in the other aspects that you've likely forgot about. By doing this, you're able to better balance your game and hopefully give your players and yourself a more enjoyable time without all of the stress that comes with it. And next is to give your players specific GM tasks that will help you save time and energy. I know some players might not be reliable and some players might be finicky about this, but GMing is a lot of work, as I've said several times, and you're balancing a lot of stuff. So it's helpful to have those players that can help alleviate some of the stress of that. Here's a good example of what this might look like. Ask one of your players to take notes while another one does scheduling and another one handles the music bot for your online D&D game. All of these players have their own individual jobs and helps you focus on GMing, preparing, and especially just running the game smoothly. This will alleviate so much stress because as a GM, you don't have to balance everything. Your players are taking up the whole of, well, being co-host GMs, if that makes any sense. I would recommend you do this only with players you trust and would be responsible and willing to do this, because some players are more passive, which is entirely okay. Another aspect is to plan in the immediate. Rather than planning 3 or 4 or 5 games later, think about your current session that's coming up. Prepare for the now rather than preparing, say, for the potential future when you're not even sure if the players are going to go down the pathway that you wanted them to. And you really want to avoid railroading. So planning in the immediate is important. But what does that look like? And is there any resource for that? Well, I definitely recommend this one book, Sly Flourish's Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. And by the way, this is not sponsored by the author. I just find this resource really useful, and I will have a link to the book down below in the description box. Let me give you a clear example that uses all the material we've talked about so far. Interesting combat. So, first, you deviate all of your administrative tasks, or some of them, to the other players. Maybe scheduling, creating tokens, or maybe even writing down notes during the game. Next, you start using pre-generated material. Maybe you pre-generate a map, or pre-generate a couple of NPCs to help ease the time of GMing for your next session. And finally, instead of focusing on 3 or 4 or 5 sessions later or on the entire campaign, you focus on the immediate game at hand. So you focus on your personal interests of narrative combat or combat focused campaigns. By doing this, you ease yourself the stress of worrying about every little thing as a game master and save yourself plenty of time to, well, enjoy other parts of your life, or to get more inspiration as a GM. I think I've summarized pretty much how I save time while GM prepping, and this has helped me save a lot of time. But that's just how I do things. I could very well be wrong, or you might have a different perspective. Let me know down below in the comment section, what is your way to save time on GMing? Or if you're a player, do you support your GM in some way, shape, or form? Let me know, because I think GMing is supposed to be fun. And yeah, it can be exhausting, but you should be having fun. That also means you need to have effective time management to, well, have fun outside of GMing. Because while it is a hobby and it's something you do for joy, it's important to have a good work-life and personal balance in everything. Of course, one way I also know how to improve time management is using Discord bots for all of your online games. In fact, to save even more time, check out this video about 50 plus Discord bots you may need for your next D&D or TTRPG, especially if you want to save time. And as always, I'm your average everyday queer host, Blurry Disposition. Hope y'all have an awesome day. Ciao!